All right, we are on Revelation chapter 11. I'm still processing yesterday. We are now on to the two witnesses. If you remember yesterday, 10:1 through 11:14 is a brief interlude between the sixth and seventh trumpet. So when we get to 15, it will be the seventh trumpet. And from there, it goes very, very quickly. And between, was it 10 and 14 is considered the middle of the tribulation. So then when you get over to chapter 15, that's like the last half of the tribulation I wrote down begins, but that must happen. There's an overlap of things. I think this timeline is still confusing to me. All right, chapter 11. Who would like to read? Caitlin, you don't need to because it would take you a long time to retype it all.
Well, I can read.
You're also reading Tony.
I'll read.
Thank you.
Who's reading? Me read?
Yeah, go ahead, Kim.
In the entire chapter.
I think let's go to 14.
Okay. Now I was given a measuring stick and told to go and measure the temple of God, including the inner court where the altar stands, and to count the number of worshipers. But do not measure the outer court, I was told, for it has been turned over to the nations. They will trample the holy city for 42 months, and I will give power to my two witnesses to prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These two prophets are the two olive trees and two candlesticks standing before the God of all the earth. Anyone trying to harm them will be killed by bursts of fire shooting from their mouths. They have power to shut the skies so that no rain will fall during the 3.5 years they prophesy, and to turn rivers and oceans to blood, and to send every kind of plague upon the earth as often as they wish. When they complete the 3.5 years of their solemn testimony, the tyrant who comes out of the bottomless pit will declare war against them and conquer and kill them. And for 3.5 days, their bodies will be exposed in the streets of Jerusalem, which is the city fittingly described as Sodom or Egypt, and the very place where their Lord was crucified. No one will be allowed to bury them, and people from many nations will crowd around to gaze at them. And there will be a worldwide holiday. People everywhere will rejoice and give presents to each other and throw parties to celebrate the death of the two prophets who had tormented them so much. But after 3.5 days, the spirit of life from God will enter them, and they will stand up, and great fear will fall on everyone. Then a loud voice will shout from heaven, "Come up!" And they will rise to heaven in a cloud as their enemies watch. The same hour, there will be a terrible earthquake that levels 1/10 of the city, leaving 7,000 dead. Then everyone left will, in their terror, give glory to the God of heaven. The second woe is past, but the third quickly follows.
Go ahead and read that to the end because of Felicia. She'll go to the end. I just thought about that.
Okay. And the heading for beginning verse 15 is the seventh trumpet. For just then the seventh angel blew his trumpet, and there were loud voices shouting down from heaven, "The kingdom of this world now belongs to our Lord and to his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever." And the 24 elders sitting on their thrones before God threw themselves down and worshiped, saying, "We give thanks, Lord God Almighty, who is and was, for now you have assumed your great power and have begun to reign. The nations were angry with you, but now it is your turn to be angry with them. It is time to judge the dead and reward your servants, prophets and people alike. all who fear your name, both great and small, and to destroy those who have caused destruction upon the earth. Then in heaven, the temple of God was opened, and the ark of his covenant could be seen inside. Lightning flashed, and thunder crashed and roared, and there was a great hailstorm, and the world was shaken by a mighty earthquake.
That's like 4 and 5 earthquakes now, right?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Felicia says, the measuring of the temple is a symbol of protection. Those who are measured or counted or under the protection of God, even as they walk through, those who are measured or counted are under the protection of God, even as they walk through tribulation. Think back a few chapters to the symbolism of the 144,000. These believers are marked for preservation. The same concept is reiterated here while calling back to a previous temple measurement in Ezekiel. Read Ezekiel 40:1 through 6. Who does Ezekiel see and what is he doing? Ezekiel, who wants to grab that? Ezekiel 41 through 6.
Been so much easier if they would have done it alphabetically.
Yes,
I got it.
go ahead.
Well, almost got it. 1 through 6.
Yes. I'm sorry. Yes, chapter 41 through 6.
In the 25th year of our exile, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th of the month, in the 14th year after the fall of the city, on that very day, the hand of the Lord was upon me, and he took me there. In visions of God, he took me to the land of Israel and set me on a very high mountain, on whose south side were some buildings that looked like a city. He took me there, and I saw a man whose appearance was like bronze. He was standing in the gateway with a linen cord and a measuring rod in his hand. The man said to me, Son of man, look with your eyes and hear with your ears and pay attention to everything I am going to show you. Pay attention to everything I'm going to show you, for that is why you have been brought here. Tell the house of Israel everything you see. I saw a wall completely surrounding the temple area. The length of the measuring rod in the man's hand was 6 long cubits, each of which was a cubit and a handbreadth. He measured the wall. It was 1 measuring rod thick and 1 rod high. Then he went to the gate facing east. He climbed its steps and measured the threshold of the gate. It was 1 rod deep.
So who does Ezekiel see and what is he doing?
Is it a prophet? I don't know who he sees, but he's measuring.
Yeah, I just wrote down a man. But did it say a golden sash?
A linen cord and a measuring rod in his hand. He was standing in the gate with a linen cord and a measuring rod in his hand.
I thought it said something about what he was wearing, like a sash or something.
Who is
Was he
this man?
wearing the linen cord or holding it?
I mean, look
It
at your
says-
concordance down under 3:4. I think you and I have the same Bible. Who was this man? He was obviously not a human being, so he may have been an angel. In chapter 9, 1 through 11, or one like him. Some say he may have been Christ himself, because he speaks as God had been speaking to Ezekiel, calling him Son of Man. That's what that says.
So he's a man and he's measuring. So what she said back
Not
here,
a human being.
yeah, not human. I always think, because a lot of times, I don't know where I remember pulling this from, but if it was like the golden sash, that represented Jesus, but I don't know that that's true. It's
Says
just
his
I'm pulling.
says his appearance was like bronze.
Maybe that's what I heard. Anyway, so those are measured or counted. So I guess he's showing Ezekiel that that God was protecting Jerusalem, right?
His people.
His people.
Guess I could get that Worsby and see what they say about Ezekiel.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
You want me to?
Sure. I can. Cindy, did you look up Ezekiel?
Hey, John.
Yeah, and John. I'll do it. I was just not gonna do it if you had it already picked, if you had it already.
Figure out where Ezekiel is in
Where
it.
is Ezekiel? It's in the Old Testament,
Yeah,
towards the back. 40. 1 through 6. It says. Okay, so for that 25th year, it says the 10th day was the start of preparation for Passover. That's interesting. The visions. I'll just read it because it's probably easier. Ezekiel 40 through 48 narrates another vision, as did, and then he gives references. The characterization of prophecy as a vision in no way detracts from its literal reality any more than Ezekiel's visions of Jerusalem's sins, idolatry, and destruction did. The vision pertains to Israel. The mountain is not named, however, it is most likely Mount Zion, lifted up from its surroundings by a great earthquake. God will be explaining details related to Israel's spiritual future in Ezekiel 40, 2 through 4. So this must be the temple in particular and Jerusalem in general. This new and glorious temple will stand in contrast to the desecration and destruction of Solomon's temple. So when you go to Israel, when you head to Jerusalem, they always say going up to Jerusalem. You're always going up, no matter where you are in Israel. Verse 3, an angel conducted a tour of all the details shown to the prophet, appearing in the form of a man, appearing like bright gleaming bronze. He could be understood as the angel of the Lord, since he is called Lord. His linen cord was for larger measurements, and the reed for shorter ones. In each case, God measured what belongs to him. Ezekiel 1 through 24 refers to Israel's historical removal from her land. 25 through 32 to historical judgments against other nations, blah, 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 blah. So therefore, chapters 40 through 48 would be thought to continue the historical prophetic claim pattern, describing the millennial conditions after Messiah comes and destroys the ungodly, under which Israel will live and worship. Believing Gentiles will also be in the kingdom as sheep of the great shepherd. While all unbelievers are destroyed, Ezekiel is to write down all the details. The outer wall is later described as a separation of the holy areas, the temples, see 1 Kings 6 and 7, to compare the details of Solomon's temple. This could not be the earthly temple, since Ezekiel was taken to Israel to see it. It could not be Zerubbabel's temple, since the glory of God was not present there. It could not be the eternal temple, since the Lord and the Lamb are its temple. Therefore, it must be the earthly millennial temple, built with all the exquisite details that are yet to be outlined. And then it says for 6 and 7, the gateway east, which the eastern gate is where Jesus, he'll land on the Mount of Olives and then he'll go through the eastern gate. It says the buildings of the east gate are first, because this will be the direct line of approach to the temple. Each opening was 10 feet across. Chambers and rooms in the wall were 10 by 10, 10.5 by 10.5. Precise measurements described a literal temple, not a symbolic one. That's what John says. Anything in Worsley?
No. It doesn't have it broken down perspectives.
Oh, where does it
I
talk?
mean, it looks like it's all,
Oh, that's like an overview. Okay.
I tried to find whatever I was looking for, 41
Oh, yeah,
through 6, but
there's one. Oh, yeah, it's huge.
so he's an angel.
I think so. Okay, so here's like a little section. It says it was April 28th, 573 BC, the first day of Passover, that God gave Ezekiel the vision that he recorded in chapters 40 through 48. The Jews had been captives in Babylon for 25 years. Remember, total, they were there for 70. The Passover would only remind them of their deliverance from Egypt. Passover was also the beginning of the religious year for Israel. And the Lord chose that significant day to tell his servant about the glory that Israel would share with the Messiah's when the Messiah established his kingdom. In the vision, Ezekiel visited the land of Israel, but unlike his previous visits, he didn't see sinful people, a devastated land, or a defiled temple. This time he saw a new land, a glorious new temple, just as Moses received the tabernacle plans while on a mountain, so Ezekiel received the plans for the temple while on a mountain. Moses wasn't allowed to enter the promised land, but he saw it from a mountain. And from a high mountain, Ezekiel saw the land and its new tribal divisions. It's unlikely that the new temple would be on any other site than Mount Zion, but critics of the literal interpretation of this vision point out that Zion is not really a high mountain. However, they may be overlooking the geographical changes that will occur to the land when the Lord returns to deliver his people to establish his kingdom. God promised the Jews would worship and serve him on a high mountain, and that Messiah would rule from a high mountain, and he will keep that promise. Both Isaiah and Micah speak of a high mountain. Zion will not only be elevated physically, but it will become the center of worship for the Lord. In the vision, the prophet saw a man colored like bronze, which suggests that he was an angelic visitor, standing outside the eastern gate of the temple, and he held a linen cord and a reed or a rod, both of which were used for taking measurements. The line for long distances and the rod for shorter measurements. The rod was probably a little over 10 feet long. To measure the property is symbolic of claiming it for yourself. During these years when the Jewish remnant was trying to rebuild their temple, the prophet Zechariah saw a man measuring the temple, and this was a sign that the temple and the city would one day be restored. God commanded the apostle John to measure the temple in Jerusalem before it was trampled down by the Gentiles in Revelation 11. This was evidence that no matter what happened, Jerusalem and the temple belonged to God and would one day be restored and sanctified. So it's an angel. And he's measuring the city because he owns it. Any thoughts on that?
Well, something here I read said that it might not be a actual temple, but God's dwelling place. Is it gonna be an actual temple?
I think it is because he said about the 10 by 10, 10 and a half by 10 and a half rooms inside that eastern gate. That's a thick wall. When we go there again, like they literally, okay, the eastern gate, I probably told you this before, the Muslims have literally put a graveyard in front of it. If you Google it, you can see it, because they think Jesus won't walk across the dead bones. And they actually have the wall, that gate is actually bricked in or stoned in so that nobody can go through it. And our first trip there, they wouldn't even let you near it. Our last trip there, I got pictures of it from the backside.
Oh, an
They never
earthquake-
said anything.
An earthquake. would take
An
care of
earthquake
that.
would take it right down. Yep. All right, so right now, slightly. Shall I wait?
Why don't the Muslims want him to come back?
The Muslims? Because they don't believe he's God. They believe so when you go through that eastern gate, it leads you to the Temple Mount. So all the way around is this wall, and it has different gates set up. So there's like the southern gate, the eastern gate, the Damascus gate, which is where the Muslims, that's their main gate. So the eastern gate, if any of those gates you go through lead you into the old Jerusalem. But then that Temple Mount is inside there. And that's that big golden dome that everyone shows pictures of, the golden dome. That is where they believe their God is. And so they consider that their holy land, not Jesus's. And Satan's always tried to deter. Yes. Yes. They think he ascended up off the rock that's inside that temple, which now you can't even go in the temple unless you're Muslim. When Stan went early on, I think his first trip, he was actually able to go inside that temple and he saw it. It's interesting how much stuff changes in a few short years. Yeah, they want to keep him from going through that gate. But that won't matter. Look at Revelation 11:2. What portion of the temple is John commanded not to measure? It was the outside, wasn't it?
This is good.
The outer courtyard.
Those worshiping inside the temple will be protected spiritually, but those outside will face great suffering. This is a way of saying that true believers will be protected through persecution. Those who refuse to believe will be destroyed. So don't bother measuring that outside.
Well, I guess the Lord's saying, I'm giving them over to themselves.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to protect the people in here, but everybody out there, like, they can do what they. It says the court of the Gentiles, or the outer court, like Cindy just said, was the area of the temple accessible to non-Jews. Keep in mind that Gentiles could convert to Judaism and, after a baptism or a mikvah cleansing, be considered born again as a true Jew. This indicates the outer court was for non-converted Gentiles. With this in mind, what is indicated by John not measuring or God protecting the outer court? Well, I think we just said that he's taking his hands off of them and letting them do what they want. Any other thoughts on that? Says these few verses confirm a theme that we've encountered before. The church is protected by God himself, but those who choose to walk in darkness, rejecting Christ and the church, will not be under God's protection. They will open themselves to the darkness and judgment. The time of judgment indicated in chapter 11 is 42 months or 1,260 days. She says, get out your phone calculator. How many years is that? 3.5. The phrase time, times, and half a time in Revelation 12:14, which we're not there yet, is indicative of the same span. Then she says, look,
Oh, I'm sorry, what did you call that time frame? What's happening? Because it just says they will trample the holy city. So what you called it something else?
3.5 years.
No, it was you describing the
Time.
event, very beginning.
The court of the Gentiles or outer court was the area accessible to non-Jews. Keep in mind that Gentiles could convert to Judaism and after a baptism or a mikvah cleansing, be considered born again as a true Jew. This indicates the outer court was for non-converted Gentiles. With this in mind, so he was pointing out the measure where he measured where they were protected. These few verses confirm a theme we've encountered before. The church is protected by God himself, but those who chose to walk in darkness, rejecting Christ and the church, will not be under God's protection. They open themselves up to darkness and judgment. The time of judgment indicated in chapter 11 is 42 months or 1,260 days, which, if you calculate that out, is 3.5 years.
So
The
the time
phrase,
of judgment. So it's the time of judgment, and it's for It's for all,
Those in the Gentile court.
but it's just right there in that place. It's not across the nation.
Well,
Just-
it would be outside of that measured area.
Anything outside, okay.
Because in the millennial reign, it talks about like people coming up from Egypt, or people, if they don't come, that the Lord won't reign, which we'll read about that later. So it's definitely a large area outside, not right there in just Jerusalem. The phrase time, times, and a half a time in Revelation 12:14 is indicative of the same span. And then she says, look up the following passages. And then it's the Daniel passages. Does anybody want to look those up? The Daniel 7:24 through 26, and Daniel 12:6 and 7, which I suspect is where he says 7 times 7 times 70.
Do you want us to look it up?
If you guys are not familiar with it, it probably would be good. If you're familiar with it, you want to look it up?
No, not if we don't need to.
Okay. Okay, so if the 7 represents completion and the 7 years represents a complete age of time, what might half of 7 or 3.5 represent? Oh, I never thought about that way before. If 7 represents completion and the 7 years represents a complete age of time, what might half of 7 or 3.5 years represent? Incompletion.
Does she give us the answer?
Yeah, she does. Half completed, not done. Very good, Caitlin. If you wrote down something along the lines of limited time or incompletion, evil, that would be correct. 3.5 years in the scriptural narrative is consistently used to describe a limited time of evil or tribulation. During such times, evil is permitted to do its work, such as in the Daniel passages above. We need this context to understand what is coming next. Then she says, read Revelation 11, 3 through 14. There are multiple ways to view the 2 witnesses. Okay, so now we know that 3.5 years, I never thought about that before, is described as a limited time of evil or tribulation. Because 7 is complete. Okay, so the witnesses, there are multiple ways to view the 2 witnesses. Scholars disagree on who they represent or who they will be. So here are a few suggested by scholars. 1, the witnesses are reminiscent of Zechariah's vision in Zechariah 4, representing a kingly and priestly offices of Zerubbabel and Joshua. Translated to John's era, the 2 witnesses represent the royal priesthood of all believers. I just feel like I read a puzzle. So some of them are, I've never heard that before. Some of them think it's Zerubbabel and Joshua. The witnesses represented, okay, here's the second thought. The witnesses represent Israel and the church. Israel sometimes called an olive tree, as in Jeremiah 11:16, Hosea 14:6. The 2 of them have incredible power to call to repentance, like the sackcloth, to perform miraculous acts, like the previous suggestion. The witness represent a corporate entity and not actual individuals. And then the third thought is the witnesses will be Enoch and Elijah, who ministered as a prophet in the first 2,000 years of human history, and Elijah, who ministered within the second 2,000 years prior to Christ, will come together to prophetically convict the world for a literal 3.5 years. Others suggest the same concept, but with Moses instead of Enoch. Yeah, I've always heard Moses and Elijah.
Me too.
But Enoch is interesting because Enoch is only really mentioned in, I think, Genesis.
Or God.
And he walked with God, but yet we know nothing about him.
Yeah.
Stan and I were talking about that yesterday. I'm like, well, if I read the book of Enoch, which I don't really have time, but like, I wonder I wonder how accurate it is, and I wonder if it would give some insight, because I'm like, this man was important if he walked with God. But maybe because
I
he
just
will
read
be
about
here.
him yesterday, so in my daily.
You did anything interesting?
No, the God just swooped him up. He disappeared.
So it says, read verses 5 and 6. What miraculous acts do the witnesses perform?
Fire
Well, the
flashes.
so there's no rain,
There's what?
to shut the sky so there is no rain. Turn the rivers and oceans into blood. And strike the earth with every kind of plague.
Yeah, and if anyone comes against them, fire will come from their mouths to consume them. Which I think this again shows like God's in control. They're not gonna die until he says it's their time to die. Okay, that was what, 5 and 6? Okay. Who else performed similar acts in biblical history?
Well, that's what my concordance says about Moses calling the plagues down on the nation of Egypt, and on Elijah defeating the prophets of Baal. And then
Elijah shut the skies too, didn't he? Because didn't they have and then they poured the water and it burned up? That story.
yeah, all those priests of Baal came up.
Oh yeah,
against him.
Jezebel's men.
Yeah.
Jezzy. Read verses 7 through 10. Who is the beast? Who is this beast? And then look at Revelation. Oh, she says, look at Revelation. Okay, let's read 7 through 10. And then, okay, let's do that first. 7 through 10. And when they have finished their testimony, the beast that rises from the bottomless pit will make war on them and conquer them and kill them, and their dead bodies will lie on the street of the great city that symbolically is called Sodom and Egypt, where their God was crucified. For 3.5 days, some from the peoples and tribes and languages and nations, so that's everybody outside the protection area, will gaze at their dead bodies and refuse to let them be placed in a tomb, because that's how they can insult the Jewish traditions. You don't let a body lay
More than-
overnight.
More than 2 days. Cindy her brother-in-law just lost his sister. She was Jewish.
Oh,
Yeah,
Cindy got
it's
to zoom in on that.
48 hours. That's
mm.
Oh, it's us.
Oh, I don't know. You're stuck too, Cindy.
Maybe it's us.
No,
What's
because everybody
wrong?
else. Okay, we can hear you now, but you were getting warbly too.
Oh, okay,
No, now you're fine.
okay.
I don't. Kathy, are you? Yeah, Kathy's eyes blinking. She looked like she was stuck here for a moment too. Okay. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and make merry and exchange gifts, just like Christmas.
That's what I was thinking.
Because these two prophets had been a torment to those who dwell on the earth, because they could not kill them. Okay, now if we get Revelation 20, verses 1 through 3, we get the answer to who this beast is. Someone want to turn to Revelation 20? 1 through 3.
I have it.
What does it say?
And I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the abyss, and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him, to keep him from deceiving the nations any more until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be set free for a short time.
So that then is Satan.
Satan.
And then what does he do to the witnesses?
To God.
No, Satan. He makes war on them and kills them. but only with God's permission.
So this is the actual event of them opening the pit with the key and Satan coming
Mhm.
out? Okay.
It rises from the bottomless pit or
So
the
it's
abyss.
mm-hmm. So
So
that
did we read yesterday? Some of this was indicative of things to come. Isn't that what we read yesterday somewhere that
because the heading
this,
for chapter 20 in my Bible says the 1,000 years.
which is the millennial reign?
So this, okay, yeah. So this is right in the middle of it.
Well, this part where saying gets released is at the end of the millennial reign. So that's confusing to me. This is why this timeline is confusing to me. The
Well,
millennial
because
reign.
in chapter 7 it says when I'm assume they're talking about the two prophets, when they complete the 3.5 years of their solemn testimony, the tyrant who comes out of the bottomless pit. So yes, that's what you just said. The 3.5 years is now completed. So it is the end.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure yesterday we read that some of this like is going to be like retelling of things that are happening.
Is this the first 3.5?
I think we're now, 10 to 14 is it says the mid. And then,
When did they?
15 through 19.
3.5 years did they torment or prophesy?
this would be in the last 3.5, I would think.
Okay.
That's why this timeline's confusing to me, but he tells us not to read it like that. You know what I mean? So it's like, but that definitely right there when he's released is at the end
Yeah.
of the millennial reign. It's not even in the whole tribulation thing. The text says, go ahead.
Oh, well, it's just interesting to me. They call what is completed is a solemn testimony. When they complete the 3.5 years of their solemn testimony, but aren't they referring to the plagues?
I don't
That's
know.
not-
These are
that's not-
questions.
It's not very solemn.
I guess our commentaries will hopefully help us.
Yeah.
The text says the bodies of the witnesses are in Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Where was Jesus crucified? Outside the wall, yeah. Well, yeah. Because they always did the crucifixions outside the city. The city-states of Sodom and Egypt represent corruption and oppression, respectively. The witnesses are killed by people filled with these same evil spirits of corruption and oppression, though the physical location seems to be Jerusalem. Ding, 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 ding. This has led some scholars to believe that John is describing Rome's oppression of Israel and the church in the first century. What is described here about these witnesses is representative of the great persecution of Jews and Christians at that time. If you've only read Revelation with a futuristic mindset, you may be tempted to dismiss this view. Keep in mind that the Bible is full of material that prophesies both short and long term. It's possible that this vision very much implicated the Roman Empire and its persecution, while also envisioning the whole church age persecution that we have seen since the first century. Read verses 11 through 14. How long were the witnesses dead, and what might that number represent? It's 3.5 days, wasn't it? Which would mean incomplete, right? Scholars who believe the witnesses are the entire church, which it's not, because it's the people outside the wall. Witnesses who believe Are people who believe the witnesses are the entire church believe this passage points to the world's desire for the death of Christianity. With this interpretation in mind, why are people terrified when the church rises from the dead? What might this look like today? Scholars who believe the witnesses are the entire church believe this passage points to the world's desire for the death of the Christianity. With this interpretation in mind, why are people terrified when the church rises from the dead? What might this look like today? Verses 10 and 11. Verse 10 says, and those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and make merry and exchange presents, because these two prophets have been a torment to those who dwell on the earth. But after 3.5 days, a breath of life from God entered them, and they stood up on their feet, and a great fear fell on those who saw. Well, they had just been mocking them, right?
Mhm.
That would be why they're terrified. They thought they were dead, and they mocked them, and now they're coming alive. Like they're probably waiting for retribution. Any other
And they're
thoughts?
gonna get it in 13.
Yeah.
Well, if we're
Any other-
looking at today, who would those two witnesses or prophets be?
I vote for Moses and Elijah.
You mean in the future? You mean future or today?
I guess today, I mean, or once we go into it, I'm just trying to figure that out. And so this will be primarily going on in Israel or worldwide?
Yes.
Well, the measurement is Israel. So,
Right.
so during the millennial reign, that's what that measurement's for. During the millennial reign, the kingdom will be set up there, but there will be nations outside of that. So God's elect is inside those walls and protected.
Okay.
Are we back to spiritual protection?
Well-
No, because that 1,000 years, we would be in our glorified bodies.
I
Because
think
there's gonna
it's-
be humans in there.
It's hard to imagine, like in my mind, I'm thinking of a city with a wall surrounding it, but there's a lot of people. I mean, so that's that to me is, not a very large space compared to the world. It's small, but you're saying this. So this is saying all the believers are in that measured space.
Well,
And
that's what
anybody who doesn't believe is outside of that space. So to fathom somebody measuring a city, like it just seems so intangible. Like it doesn't make sense to me. That's why I was asking earlier, is this just a certain city and the people in that city and everybody else is outside of them? Or this is symbolic of all the believers?
Well, and you got to remember too that those of us that come back in our glorified bodies, they're not going to be human bodies like what we're used to. So we'd all be crammed in a room. Like, I don't know how many angels are in this room right now. You know what I mean? Like, so if we're in our glorified bodies, we don't know what that looks like either.
Yeah.
We'll find out, I guess. We can continue to read. But I think the two witnesses would be Moses and Elijah. But I think it could be Enoch too, because they didn't experience, well, Moses experienced death. We just don't know where his body is. But we do know that the angels from Jude, we know that they fought over his body in Jude. But there's no other references about it. And we know that he did die, and God buried him, and he did not make it into the holy city, whereas Enoch and Elijah were taken.
In chariots of fire.
Yeah. So these are the questions.
This is worse than yesterday.
Well, we just aren't going to get all the answers today. So it says, read Revelation 11:15 through 19. The long-awaited seventh trumpet has sounded to usher in the last day. According Okay, the last day capitalized, by the way. So it's a proper noun. According to verse 15, what has happened to the kingdom of the world? So verse 15. Then the seventh angel blew his trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. So the kingdom of the world became the kingdom of Jesus. Well, and it would during the millennial reign because Satan will be bound.
The seventh trumpet makes the world, takes the world away, and it becomes the kingdom.
Kingdom of our Lord. The 24 elders, likely representing the Old and New Covenant believers, sing a song declaring the time has come for God to do three things. What are they in verse 18?
Judge the dead, reward your servants, the prophets, as well as your holy people.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, mine reads, and for rewarding your servants, the prophets and saints, and those who fear your name, both small and great, for destroying the destroyers of the earth. What is 3?
Judge the dead. Reward your servants, prophets. And destroy the
Destroy the earth
Destroy
or destroy?
who have caused, all who have caused destruction.
Destroy the destroyers. See, I would think like judging the dead, rewarding your servants. Like, I wonder why they're broken into different categories. Because the destroyers, I would think would be. Huh, okay. Verse 19. What is seen inside the holy temple? Ooh,
The ark of the
the ark. Okay, looking back over this chapter, what stands out to you? What impacted you the most? We have no idea. We're confused. What theological principle about God and his relationship to humanity can you draw out of this passage? What theological principle about God and his relationship to humanity can you draw out of this passage?
Which passage? The last one?
I
or
guess the
whole
entire
thing?
thing.
Well, them that's bad is gonna get in trouble, and them that's good are gonna be saved.
Yeah, it's like, believers will be protected,
Yes.
and destruction to those who don't believe. It's like Lori
I think
said.
protected and rewarded.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Those worshiping inside the temple will be protected spiritually, but those outside will face great suffering. Those who refuse to believe will be destroyed.
Judgment will be bad
Believers,
for non-believers.
good for believers. We almost made it through Felicia.
Well, any other thoughts? Caitlin says destroy the earth and destroy those who destroy the earth.
Yep.
There's a lot of that going on. I mean, when you think about the Garden of Eden and God gave us a responsibility in the Garden of Eden, and you look at the world now where it's always, almost everything is us trying to be God instead of just enjoying the earth as he created it. We're always trying to do it better. Our own little Tower of Babels. Any other thoughts? All right, this concludes the reading of God's word for today. We'll pick up tomorrow with the commentaries for chapter 11 and try to make sense of a timeline that I'm not sure that I will ever make sense of. But we will try.
Well, there's some stuff we're not supposed to understand.
No, this is true.
That's what I said.